Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us via virtual fourth space on Facebook and Zoom for today's event, Transdisciplinary Approach to Self-Care, Advocacy, and Community. We really appreciate you being here for this important work you're about to embark on, thinking through ways of redefining intelligence and binary systems towards building self-care and community. We are running this event meeting instead of webinar style, as the intent is for the participants, all of you, to really kind of connect and dialogue, interact with one another in the ways that Zoom allows for, so with video, audio, and text. But having said that, if you prefer to keep your video muted, please do so. And we do encourage you to keep your audio muted while someone else is speaking throughout the session today. Those of you following along on Facebook, feel free to share your comments and we'll relay them here to our workshop facilitator. And on that note, it is my great pleasure to introduce and welcome Chesline Pierre-Paul, an MA candidate in translation studies at Concordia, who will tell you a little bit more about her work and this workshop now. Welcome, Chesline, and have a great workshop.
Thank you so much, Anna, and thank you for the whole team. It's truly an honor to be there, and I've just love the fourth space and everything you embody, which is the reason I reached out. And so as people are just getting comfortable, getting some water, etc., I just want to for you to be able to be situated a little bit as to what we're going to do, who I am, and what's the purpose and the intent for this beautiful event that's going to be super collaborative. And so like Anna was saying, I'm going to talk about something that I want to say self-created, but also being externally influenced, obviously, and which I term the transdisciplinary intelligence. And so before I get into that premise, ultimately what I want us to be able to do together is to walk the gamut from a very macro theoretical conceptual approach, and then to translate that into something that's practical and actionable that each and every single one of us will be able to carry with us after the event, right? The point is not to be super meta and then not to have any ground to stand on as a contribution. So I want to have a sort of convergence, if you may, between the practical aspects and the conceptual and macro analytical part, so that they can come together and we can be more empowered by knowledge and also by a course of action that is synonymous and that agrees with the spirit that we've been able to establish, right? And so it's all about self-care and advocacy and looking at ways to empower ourselves through positive disruption when we live in institutionalized settings, where there are certain ways that we have to approach the system strategically to find empowerment and to live through authenticity and integrity of purpose. And so, yeah, I know it's super vague for the time being. So like I said, I just want people to have a fair chance of just getting comfortable. And if we look at how it's going to pan out, so as you know, it's an hour, 30 minutes. And what I'm going to do is for the first chunk, I really want to just deep dive into theoretical approach to get you settled. I have three main nuggets, if you may, that will allow us to be able to have the full 360 vision of what I mean by transdisciplinary intelligence. And at any given point in time, if you want to unmute yourself, jump in, ask a question, or interact with the chat, it would be my uppermost pleasure to have you end up that part of the conversation. And after that, we're just going to open the floor. So all the thoughts that will have just, emerged in your psyche as we would have been just going through the main three theoretical framework. Then at this time, we're going to have a good 10 minutes of just going around and having this multi-directional exchange. And after that, we're going to keep going with the rest of the practical aspect, right, of the event. And towards the end, it's all going to be breakout rooms so that in your groups, you can get to co-constructing and deconstructing the knowledge and the information that we've been able to assemble and see how that fits your own personal narrative as a person who's there to be of service to themselves and to their own communities of practice. So that's kind of the structural gist. And as you can see, we're not having much of a presentation visually because we really want us to be looking at each other and interact as much as can be through all of that digital aspect. And that's it more or less for the structure. And if not, to get you a bit settled as to who I am and why I am here. So what brings me here today? And it answers the question I have sometimes, why here and why now, right? And so, yeah, like Anna was saying, I'm studying at Concordia, I'm doing my master's in translation studies. And I find that my experience at university and work it's very synonymous with what we're going to discuss in terms of how I'm living through my own, theory of transdisciplinary intelligence. And I'm doing this master's about transracial oral indigenous culture. So it's basically a project of me and other storytellers coming together and using our own indigenous voices through beautiful storytelling-based, knowledge that we share with other people. And it's going to be a story, kind of like a translation music album, so you can listen to it. And we'll be taking voice acting lessons so that you can really hear us and see us fully on our terms and through self-determination, disruption, and creativity. So that's kind of what brings me to Concordia in this regard. And like I was saying, with the first space, I love what they embody, what they're here for. And I felt there was, again, a natural conflation of interest in terms of having the spirit, right, to want to push forward conversations about deconstruction and empowerment of people and of communities as well. So that's just my little spiel about me. Like I said, so you have a sense of who I am and why we're doing this today. Cool. So before jumping right in, because this is, like we're saying, going to be super collaborative, I want to know why you're here today. So the people are joining in, right? You can unmute yourself if you're more comfortable, or you can just, write in the chat. But just to say, what's the reason why you're here? What you were curious about? What was the thing that told you, okay, you know what, I might check this one out. So if anyone wants to jump in, I know it could be a bit intimidating like this, so you can use the chat and we can just go scroll through your comments. Let's see. So I think maybe we're still a bit shy, so that's really cool. Go ahead. I see someone.
Hi. I know I just came in halfway through the question, so forgive me if it's wrong. I guess you were asking what brought us to participate in this event. Well, for me, I watched your presentation during the master's thesis program, like the 3-minute presentation, and the issues you're addressing about just like the approach you're doing with your research is really interesting to me, because it's sort of what I want to do in my graduate research later. Because I want to, personally, what I want to do for my research is find like sort of like an art therapy based in Somali folklore and mythology, and like language and philosophy. So to deal with like intergenerational trauma that like is present in the Somali community that isn't being addressed or being addressed using the current like mental health system. So I want to maybe do that, and also introduce Somali language and terminologies and I guess knowledge into the academic world. So the way you're doing in your research for your culture, I was really inspired by that, and I just want to see what you had to say. And so thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for what you're saying. It's beautiful. I just listened to you and I have so many thoughts. I feel we can definitely have a really soulful conversation about all of that. So thank you so much for what you're saying, and I'm happy you're here. Great. So again, I have a bunch of thoughts. I'm going to put it on pause for a second, so maybe someone else can chime in. Then we can have a bit of a bigger sense of, everybody's profile and background. So another brave-hearted soul wants to pitch in, or maybe, like I said, use the chat. So that's also an option.
I can go. I'm so grateful for this. Thank you. I'm here out of intuition. I just found it, was like, oh my gosh, this sounds amazing. I am a user experience designer, and or like web designer and theorist, and I'm interested in approaching web design from a trauma-informed accountability perspective, drawing upon generative sematics and cultural sematics like Resmaa Minnicum's racialized trauma work, and how that can be applied in practice and inform like technical design practice. So I'm super curious about your work.
Thank you so much, Alex. What you're doing seems again to be tremendous, and there's so many connectors that can be embedded into your line of practice and what you stand for. So I love that you're here out of intuition. So that's a good thing. And it's a very powerful tool for branding our own stamp on intelligence. That's very empowering. So thank you again for what you're here for. And I'm so looking forward to the rest of this. So maybe if we have another courageous soul who wants to pop on by, and then we can keep cracking with the rest. And again, guys, feel free to use the chat as well, so you don't have to expose yourself through the video if you're uncomfortable with that.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay, great. My name is Corey and I teach at Dawson College. I teach in sociology and humanities, but I've been part of I guess a group of people. We've been running a group of collective care for teachers and people who work in education for over 2 years. And so it's definitely, I mean, we're a very multidisciplinary group and we're always looking for different kinds of practices and conversations to have to kind of deepen our connections to each other, but also to kind of think about the work we're doing. And I really liked, I was really interested in the video I saw where you're talking about smart dualism, and it feels like a big part of our work is getting students and ourselves to think about the binaries that we live in. So I was just really seemed like you're going to be playful and open with some of those ideas. So I'm curious and would like to meet some new people too. And yeah, just a nice way to spend Friday.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Corey. Again, just a beautiful sense of natural convergence for everybody who's coming here today. And we're going to reprise definitely what you mentioned about the binaries. It's a big core of what I do and I approach it. Excellent. So before we do that, something I love to do just to set the mood off really right is to have a sort of energetic commitment to this event. You know, typically we're asking people how they're doing, and my interest is a bit different. Not that I don't care, it's only that I love establishing a purpose in terms of how I want to show up energetically. So that is not dependent on the conditions of how my day went. It's a choice that I'm just willing myself to live through. And so I encourage you to do the same individually, right? Typically what I do is I pick 3 adjectives that stand for how I want to show up, right? And so for this event, what all of you guys, my commitment is I want to be playful, like Corey is saying. I want to be grounded, and I want this to be a powerful conversation. And so those are my 3 words that I want to stand by and that I'm going to live out through this event. So you can all take a few seconds and think through your own self-descriptors that you would like to be the embodiment of your energetic presence for us, for this event, right? In communion and in celebration. So yeah, so you can do this individually, or you can also share it in the chat for sure. Great. So like I said, the first part, I'm going to posit lots of my structural thought around transdisciplinary intelligence. And any point in time, reach out, the chat, or unmute. And then after that, we'll transition into a very just open group conversation about this. So super deconstructed. So when I chose, let's say, the title for this, I'm all about that linguistic life. And also, I wanted to embody different parts of my identity and what I stand for. So when you look at trans, automatically for me, I would be thinking of queer studies. And I will also be thinking of semantics and linguistics. How trans, you know, is from my way of living it and embodying it. It's about the transitioning state, right? So there's a sense of impermanence where you're not stuck into a fixed narrative, and you have enough elasticity within yourself to grow and to move and to flow. And so in that sense, it's a very natural coming and going, right? And it's an energy that's about this curiosity of extending yourself beyond a fixed point, a fixed narrative. So I wanted to choose trans for that alone. Then when you look at discipline, right? So what do I mean by disciplinary? Automatically, because of how we are trained and conditioned intellectually here in our setting, we will default back to, okay, we're talking about field of study, we're talking about engineering or languages or what have you, right? And so for the purpose of our conversation, I want us to look deeper at discipline so that we can see how there is a systematicity and biases, right? And how something that applies in one situation can also translate and bleed over into our own perspective. By the way, thank you guys for reaching out. Thanks, Alex, for your playfulness, curiosity, and respect. So that's your energetic commitment. Beautiful. And so, yeah. So when I think of discipline, I look at it as a milieu, an environment that you're part of, where there's an assumption about how you need to perform and how you need to show up intellectually and ideologically, right? And so it's all the places where you go to, and if you don't know that person, then you're made out to look like something you're not, right? So if there's a lot of assumption in that space, and there's a really forceful conditioning that's not always obvious, where the way that you present and the way that you carry yourself is very normatized. So you not necessarily belong to yourself in that interaction because there's an expectation that you need to express conformity in a way that does not reflect your own definitions or your self-definitions. And in that regard, you can look at discipline, right, as being this little ideological bunker or a pocket that applies at different settings. It doesn't have to be a negative, but oftentimes it is manipulated in a way that is disempowering, right? And so this runs through for, let's say, you can think of academia as definitely a space where there is that disciplinary energy and capability. And you can look at even work or professional endeavors where there's an expectation in how you have to carry yourself through that imposed definition of, of conformism. So that's one thing. Then the other part, which is the intelligence. So I wanted to look at what does it mean to be an intelligent person? More often than not, what happens is the expectation that we need to kind of boast, right, a form of intellectualism by spewing off a bunch of rote, like big words and big data. And we need to be very great on all things that have to do with rote memorization. So numbers, historical facts, et cetera, right? And the way that it's framed, it's a very elitistic container for intelligence, and it's very minimalist, and there's not much room for creativity. There are people whom I adore and respect, like Brené Brown, Rob Bell, Liz Gilbert, and through, just observing their work, what I really love is I was finally able to have a definition of intelligence that was much more conforming to my own ideals. And so what they say about intelligence and what I'm saying, adding my voice to that beautiful narrative, is intelligence is a capacity of a person to integrate and to live through different paradoxes. So what do I mean by that? Too often when we're prompted to express ourselves, and to formulate an opinion, there's a sense that it needs to be a definitive, irrevocable, and very polarized idea, especially when you're talking about politics or other issues like that, where there's a sense of controversy, right? And so people are polarized into a very rigid binary that is not evolving, where they have to commit to either one or the other end of the spectrum. But the truly intelligent person, according to that definition, is a person who can see through all of that, can look at a spectrum, be it a binary or a non-binary spectrum, and in all the things, especially those that resemble the closest thing to an extremism, can still manage to pluck and to tease out an essence where there is an intellectual merit. And so the truly intelligent person in that sense can embody different opinions that are rooted in contradiction and in paradoxes, and still find something of value, can assign and allocate intellectual merit to something that is different from, something else. And so it's a world where you have to live through nuance, and you deny the possibility of extremism. You're not committed to the one thought over the other. You're not invested in your opinion having to be predominant in a way that denies autonomy to an opposing or contradicting or contrasting or a complementary view, right? And so this, again, it's a very unpopular perspective, but it's a very grounding one, and it empowers you and your communities. And so this is a definition of intelligence that defines what I mean by transdisciplinary intelligence. And so if we look at just the title, right, is the idea that you are somebody who lives through paradoxes. So you understand somebody who does not understand you. You understand a discipline that is alien to the one that you're a part of, be it professionally or academically, right? And as you do so, you also navigate spaces. And within you, there is a microcosm of transdisciplinarity. You're not just beholden to the one ideological perspective, to the one disciplinary framework. You're not invested in really empty binary rhetorics where there's, I need to be right for you to be wrong. You're not about that. You can look to someone who doesn't get your point and you can see the value in that. And at the same time, you're not negating yourself. You're simply recognizing that, hey, there's an alternative truth, an alternative perspective, and I can be empowered by understanding somebody who stands in opposition to me. And so this is a state of self-disruption, right? And so this is what I want us to explore. And so I shared with you that I have 3 main nuggets for the theoretical framework that I kind of lived through. So it's kind of, to me, it's a cycle, it's a continuity. So the first stage is what I call the disciplinary supremacy. And it's this idea that oftentimes when we are, let's say, groomed into a practice, we are groomed into a profession, we are groomed into a discipline, there's an expectation of how we need to behave so that we don't stand out, so that we're not exposed, so that we're not minoritized, so that we're not disempowered, right, by the establishment there. And so what happens oftentimes is, you know, like I said, those assumptions, right? Oh, how come you don't know that person and you're studying that program, right? You're being shamed because the way that you approach that perspective is not particularly conforming, right? And then it's made to seem as if you were the one who carried the deficit, whereas that doesn't have to be so. And so in spaces like this, where people are goaded by this intention, unbeknownst to them, or, you know, to their own awareness. So in spaces like that, where there's a very strong push towards a monoculture, the one way of doing culture, the one way of doing discipline, people fall into what I call assumptive behavioralism. So their behavior is all about assumptions. So they're in a reactive state and they're not much more in a self-reflection. They're not applying a form of intelligence that challenges them into self-disruption and where they have to interrupt their own narrative to integrate a world that is not centralized around their own perspective. And when I say this, I'm sure many of you can relate to that, where you've been, it could have been a classroom, or it could have been with just hanging out with some friends or family member, and you're the only one who stands up. How come you don't know that? As if that makes you less than, because the way that you articulate knowledge doesn't vibe with how their knowledge is integrated, right? And so what happens is when you live in a monocultural world like this, where people want to impose upon you the one archetype, the one possibility, the one way of being intelligent according to their own stereotypes and their own prejudice and their own bias, right? So that it's very easy to fall into like that sense of, like I was saying, to have that supremacy in your head. So when you see that, people, they get very offended, but they need to understand. Let's say I'm studying, I don't know, languages, right? And you know, sometimes there are programs that have competitions against one another, or you work for a firm and then you have a competitor and then you fall into what I call a defective binary, right? So it's a +1 economy where you either withhold the entirety of the merit, the entirety of a right to existence, to a right to acknowledgement, and that entails that somebody else is denied that possibility. So it's this economy that is broken where I have to be right so that you're wrong, or vice versa, right? So there's always somebody who carries the totality of power and somebody who is divested from it and then carries that deficit. So it's a very ego driven and very brittle analytical perspective. But there's so many ways that we've been in environments where there are different levels and intensity to this, but I'm sure that you all can relate to that in some way, shape, or form, right? And so that's the stage 1. So once you recognize that people live through different cycles of energies, and when there are certain spaces that are very controlling and normative, you're aware of that, and the question becomes, what can I do to empower myself? It can seem very daunting to have to live through spaces like this and to feel that you are just the one person and you don't want to commit academic suicide or professional suicide. So then you ask, what are my options? Awareness on its own is one thing, but then how do you implement awareness in a way that you're not exposing yourself, in a way that you're not denying yourself, and in a way that you still stand for what you believe in, that you can look at yourself in the mirror and know that your being was rooted in their own integrity of purpose, right? And so before we get into the action part, I'm going to continue the cycle so that, like I said, your actions can mirror your own psychology. And it can mirror the framework that you live through. That's all about that transdisciplinary intelligence, right? Because action without perspective is not going to take you so far, but then just the mere intellectualization of everything without the action is not gonna fly either. So you have people like Gary Vaynerchuk and Robin Sharma, and they say stuff like ideation without execution is delusion, or the idea that if you don't execute on what your intellectual commitment is, or, well, what's the point? So now that you're aware, let's say that there are many worlds, pockets of worlds that you're part of, whether it be in your program or at work, where you feel that concentric force towards that conformism that is very exclusive of everything else, and where they're setting themselves up to exist in their little bubble as people who embody, disciplinary supremacy. You see it. Then what's the next step for you intellectually? Then the thing is, now you need to, let's say I'm going to give you a random example. I'm studying cultural anthropology, right? And I notice certain things and I go, okay, I'm sure there's another way to address that issue. Does not involve a solely anthropologically motivated, vindication or postulate or ideology. Then what do I do? Well, the idea is that to grow, you need to be a curiosity-driven person. Like, you need to nourish your intellectual appetite and desire to reinvent yourself through a disruption. So you need to accept that your world is beautiful as it is, and that sometimes people take a perspective and they turn it into a bias. So the perspective is the standpoint that you're on, and it's the way that you're peering through at wherever around you, right? Then you see something and there's a validity in what you see, but it's also an incomplete picture. The bias, it's also this thing that you see a part of the thing, but then you take the part and you treat it as if it were a totalitarian space. So in the bias, whether or not you're aware of it, you look at the same thing from maybe the same angle, but what you see, you treat as if it were an absolute, undeniable, undisputable, irrevocable truth. Whereas a perspective is still looking at something, but with the understanding that what you see is a partial appreciation of a culture, of an event, of a profession, and you're not trying to crack this to be totalitarian. You know that you have a partial opinion that's truthful about an event, but you don't overinflate your perspective into thinking that that gives you a right to knowledge, information that others don't have because they have a different perspective, right? So once that you see that you live into this very stringently monocultural, disciplinary, supremacist world intellectually, then what you do, like I said, is apply curiosity and then look elsewhere. So look outside of what you know in terms of your profession, outside of your program, right? And it doesn't have to be high stake curiosity. It could be just a random class or a video or a book or a podcast, but you want to nourish your brain cells so that they rub against something that speaks of divergence. That doesn't look like you, basically. So that's where your disruption starts. And so once you do that, the reflex is to fall into the defective binary, right? So let's say you're learning about another culture, another language, then the danger, and it happens as you're transitioning, is to start using comparative language. I hear it all the time. Oh, Haitian Creole is like French, right? And when you do that, right, and again, it's not about intention, it's about like the intellectual architecture behind it. When you say that, you're taking something that is its own thing, right, that has its own autonomy, and then you take it and you're trying to make it relative to your own centrality. So in a way, you're denying the autonomy of something that is not you. And that makes it all about you. And then you don't realize that. But as we're transitioning, it's okay for us to turn our perspectives into biases, because that's not the end of the road for us. So when I catch myself saying it's like that, it's like, what's a better way to not deny the autonomy of something that is external to what I've known, so that I don't end up falling back into the fallacy of the monocultural state? And then the next step to that is then not only to have an awareness of another discipline, but to start analyzing and treating it from the perspective of that discipline. So I tell people it's, for example, you're doing, translation, and you're taking that sociology course. The first reflex is going to be explaining sociology as a translator, right? And so that's the thing where you're pulling back to you, to what you know, and that's okay because your universe at this point has this size. And then the more disruption you have by increments, and then the more capacity you have to dissociate and not to make everything about what you've known before. And so at first I'll be explaining sociology as a translator. Then the next level of disruption, when every time I catch myself, is out, no, now I'm going to look at sociology and then trying to access the most sociological part of my brain to explain sociology back to me. And so what I do here is I complete my disruption because I'm no longer relying on something that puts me back into an economy of this is like that. And so this is more than that, and this is less than that, right? I'm disrupting that right off the bat. And so once you get into that, it's, like I said, this is looking at a binary more or less. So this leads me to just a few thoughts on what a binary is. Binary gets a bad rep because it's misused or it's applied with ill intent. But a binary is simply this understanding that there is a form of dualism in things. The problem is, irrespective of what your programming is, or what your approach to life is, or what your framework is, it becomes dangerous every time you use your perspective as the norm for behavior for others people, right? For other people, right? So binary in and of itself doesn't have to be a bad thing. It's how you approach it, how you integrate it, and what you make it say that's gonna be accountable for the validity or the dangerous nature of your binary system. And so binary to me doesn't have to be an oversimplification, right? It's understanding that there's a spectrum, and then you're breaking down the spectrum into two big chunks. But within one half of it, you can have so much complexity that can make binary a very potent system. But what happens too often, right, is people, let's say they get into an argument or they're getting into politics, and now they use binary. So what do? They own their part of the binary with that supremacist disciplinary attitude, and then we're going to oversimplify your part of the argument to just bring it down and to dub it down and to water it down. So this is a way where they're misutilizing it, and they're falling into oversimplification so that they can soothe their own ego. They can deny you having your own autonomy as a fully functional and amazing and human being, where you can have divergence. And so that's what too often happens, right? And then people say binary is XYZ. A strong and healthy way to use binary as a way to establish a report is, like I say, is getting into the nuance. So even on my side of the fence, the things that I stand for, I need to be self-aware and honest enough to recognize the deficit and the argument that I'm making. And every time you're able to reassess and reevaluate yourself non-judgmentally, you're giving yourself tools of massive construction so that you can be empowered to, redesign your thought, right? You're not invested in the outcome of being right or wrong. You're interested in how can I be more generous about my assumptions and how I can strengthen my own, internal compass as an intellectual thinker. So that's the thing for. Yeah, so what does getting nuance look into action? Excellent question. So thank you, Melissa. Anne. Okay, I'm going to give you this. I have an argument with someone, or they have an opinion about a topic, and I disagree with whatever the thing is. As I am disagreeing, I will recognize the stuff that they're saying that makes sense, right? So, okay, I will give you an example. I don't know. It could be, what could I say really? It could be anything, but I guess it helps when you have a real example. So let's say they're for against, I don't know, like marriages and certain conditions or whatever. I will listen to them, right? And I will look at what they're coming to me with, and I will say, hey, that's a very valid point. This makes total sense. I agree with that. But there's a way that I would then transition to reasserting, what I stand for. I don't have to deny the whole point of view because it challenges me. I love being challenged because then I can reevaluate my own thoughts, right? So if they say, okay, the reason why I think this shouldn't happen or those people shouldn't do that is because X, Y, Z. What I can do is I can say, I understand where you're coming from. I understand why this is valid internally for you. I can see how this is merit and how this sustains and supports your own ethos, your own way of looking at the world, your own moral attitude. I can see this as being extremely valid. Where I can start disagreeing and manifesting my own divergences and saying, because you would have approached it this way, you cannot turn your perspective into a bias, and you cannot turn your own history into a norm for other people. So I can recognize validity in what they're saying, but then I'm nuancing and saying, you don't have to be totalitarian about how you go about asserting your own intelligence or your own ideas. There's a way that you can recognize that it works for you, but not for others. There's a way that you can also nuance in saying it depends on the context, right? If I'm talking about this country or that region and that region or that culture, I cannot blanketedly carry like an ideological perspective and then force it down on people irrespective of their own personal situations, right? And so the nuances is saying yes, but, it's saying yes, and it's saying no, but, and it's saying no, etc. So the nuance is saying I'm not going to subscribe to something in its entirety because I want to be mindful of the human, the spectrum of human experience. And so I hope this helps a little bit, Melissa, in terms of what do I mean by nuance in this part, right? And remember, we're gonna talk about, thank you so much. We're gonna talk about action in a minute, right? So this is just thinking about like the intellectual part. And so now we get into like this binary that is healthier, where we could be a smart dualist in the sense that, like I said, I can recognize something in the other person without denying my perspective. And people think that if I see this is good, then my own opinion becomes kind of shaky. So that's not what this is about. If you want to be right or wrong, you're already wrong. If you're interested in just being a curiosity-driven person, if you genuinely want to know and learn and expand, you need to accept contradiction, and you need to accept this paradoxes, right? And paradox is healthy because it means I'm not going to be an extremist in my way of thinking. I have adaptation in my core, and it means that I can always look for a way to connect with someone, even where there's an appearance of disconnect, you know? And again, we're gonna get back to that in a set. So this is, let's say, the transitioning from monocultural, like supremacy of disciplinary thinking, and to transitioning towards a binary, where automatically you wanna compare, right? I did translation, now I'm doing psychology, and I'm gonna look at psychology like a translator. And then once you really apply fully disruption, now you start looking for the most psychological part of yourself to explain psychology back to you, right? And then you grow because you cannot look at it the same way, so your perspective has shifted. Then the next step for me is what I call the supra-binary consciousness. So when you look at supra, it's above, it's elevated, right? So it's this capacity of you to kind of have this out of the body overview, and you can see the binary, you can see the monoculture, and then you can see something that's either or of these things. So what does it look like in real life? I will give you an example of how to apply it, right? So I'm coming back to this idea that we're living in institutionalized settings. And by so doing, there's a way that we're challenged in how we can manifest agency, but that challenge actually is empowering once we know what to do about it. So let's say I'm taking this course and I look at the reading list and I'm not comfortable with it. But then I have to respond to that specific author, but I don't ideologically commit to any one of the postulates that are being made. I don't want to commit academic suicide. I don't want to get into a confrontation. I also don't want to deny my own right to, self-governance intellectually. So what do? I don't want to write a paper that I don't believe in, right? And so let's say you look at the different frameworks. So the first part would be go over it, and then look at all the biases and look at the things that are sound in that perspective, right? So it could be, okay, argument well constructed, it's just the premise is biased, right? Or where's the data coming from? So you need to have, again, that healthy and that stronger binary where you give and take. You agree and you disagree with the same comment, with the same person, with the same ideology. You're not doing rashing, you're doing refined, nuance, complexity. That's what you're doing. So first to look at this, to look at all the imbricated layers, right, that are just embedded into that paper. And so first you went from the bias and then jumped into the binary. And then with the subprime binary is you see them both and you go, what's the alternative? Just because people ask you a question, yes or no, doesn't mean your answer has to be neither yes nor no. You could either go for a yes, but, and again with the nuance, or you can craft your own answer altogether. So the assumption is I have to respond to what I've been propositioned, as opposed to deny those answers to be able to craft space for me, right? So let's say in that paper, I can look to, I still have to use that article. So I did my little analysis, okay, I'm cool. Now I can look to somebody who already has an established thought, right? That runs counter to that person bias, okay? And then now it's like I'm creating a dialogue between opposites, but a healthy dialogue. Again, my point is not to deny the validity of the paper, it's to establish a stronger alternative that is empowering to me. So I am educating myself in the process, and then I'm also educating whomever is going to read me. So too often as students, we feel disempowered, but we don't realize that every time we're interested in an assignment, we have lots of agency. So let's say I have an oral presentation. In my oral presentation, what happens is because of the force of concentric, conformity, people are going to have lots of reruns of the same stuff because it's hard to dare to be out of the box because you don't have the right tools. But once that I'm able to deconstruct a thought, that even if I don't like it, I'm not going to reject it. I'm going to challenge myself to look for the value in it. I'm going also to commit myself to to look into like the biases and the cracks and the deficits. Then I challenge myself to even rise beyond and above those two perspectives, right? And I go into something that is supra-binary. That's neither this, it's neither that. And it's not about competition, it's about elevation. I want to have something that allows me to have a more complete, constructive overview that's about transformational thought. And so now I'm creating a dialogue between, those three things. And that's what I'm sharing with people. And again, I use a paper. So I'm using the information I was given, but then I made it my own. So this is what I wanted to show you. So from the monoculture to the binary, from the defective binary to the empowered binary option, and then to the supra-binary consciousness, where I can elevate my game by also tapping into alternative discourses, and I'm out plugging them into this one narrative. And so we can see the evolution and the transition, and that becomes an educational moment, because what you have is so unique that all your lived experiences and your passions and your interests, when they converge, they make you, and there's a uniqueness about that. And so when you deprive yourself of the opportunity to manifest your brilliance by using a transdisciplinary intelligence approach, you are denying lots of riches to your communities. And we don't think at classroom as a community, but it is. There are people, maybe it's the presentation that you're making that they needed to be empowered and to seek changes and to have open dialogues and then to grow into curiosity and then to deconstruct themselves into self-disruption. But if you never make that paper, if you never make that presentation, then it's going to die with you. And so that's where, we need to find and to gain awareness. So that's one example. Another one would be, let's say you're at work and maybe, people who are micromanagers and you go, okay, what am I going to do with this? I don't want to be in a situation, but I have to say for whatever reason. So how do I not make my profession a form of victimhood for myself? And the same way that, and what the example I gave about academia, right? How do I not become a victim of my education? So you need to seek cracks and crevices and chasm, and then you fill them up with your own gusto, with your own interests, with the own intersectionality of your passions. And every time you are intersectional, right? So, okay, cool. Perfect. I'm going to show the slides in a second. But yeah, so every time you're being transdisciplinary, you have a competitive edge, if you want to look at it like that. Because sure, maybe you are in translation, everybody does that, but does everybody look at translation through sociology, through economics, through photography? So it's the total convergence of all your interests that makes you able to claim space with authority in a way that no one else can in your universe. And it's not about expertise, it's about, like I said, being able to open channels of connection between disciplines that are usually segregated. So we never think of, let's say, economics and anthropology or translation at once. And so that's where you come in, and where you can help people find elevation through that disruption, right? And so going back to the micromanager situation, right, you go, okay, what can I do? And so you can find creative ways to create new bridges and connection. You have an assignment that is confined like that, so there's a box in. Doesn't mean that that's all you have to do. You can find parallel ways around that to support a sense of natural disruption that's going to empower you to actually talk about the things you care about. No, it's like me before, I would be doing coordination work at a center, but I actually ended up doing language coaching. So people came from me just expecting to have the answer for an assignment, which I would never give. But then we actually went into a deep conversation about how do you feel about learning French, what are your fears and your thoughts with your background, what you want to achieve, and then giving them like an actionable plan for them to do and signing them up for events that are free around campus and give them tools like that. So you take something that is assumed to be restrictive because that's how it is digested by most people in the same institutional world as you. And then you take that thing and then you flip it and you look for, okay, where can I actually squeeze in something that's about that transdisciplinary life? And that's the thing that people are going to come back to you for. They don't come to you because you did what you're expected to do. They come to you for the edge, right? That only you can communicate, because only you are a transdisciplinary portal towards intelligence that comes in from different worlds. If you don't do that, it's the best way to be forgettable, because what you do is the expected. It's the norm, right? So that was, again, my going around looking at that. So I know I said a lot of things, and now is the best time for us just to have some reactions. So questions or thoughts or comments before we move on. Again, feel free to unmute or use the chat. Looking forward to that. Let me see. Okay. So as we're talking, I have a slide I will show you. Let me see. Okay, so I will share my screen with you as people maybe are thinking. And like I said, feel free to jump in and let me know if I'm going too fast, if I'm not clear, because I tend to be super excited about that. Okay, cool. So, wow, cool. So we already did the recap. And then after that, we're going to look into the self-care and advocacy. We're almost there. But before, I wanted to give you a few prompts. So think about those questions. Now that we have a sense of what we mean by transdisciplinary intelligence, right? So it's somebody who has information and knowledge and curiosity that evolves across discipline or academic world. So you're not committed just to the one perspective. You have a sense of something that's bigger than what you were trained to do or to be. So if you look at those two, think of your own circle of influence and people you know, and who do you think will qualify as the greatest transdisciplinarian and why? So what about that person makes them somebody who reflects a lot of that transdisciplinary spirit of looking beyond the binary and of sharing something that extends beyond, the job that they have or the studies that they're doing? So you can think about that and you can share again in the chat or, just unmute yourself. And my other question is basically just elaborating on that. So what about them specifically makes you go, okay, yeah, that's somebody who lives and behaves and thinks transdisciplinarily? You can take a few seconds and think about that. Could be a prof, could be a friend, could be a kid, could be whomever. There's no restriction on who that person could be. Okay, so I'm gonna let you stew that over in your head and I will share you two models. Okay, so maybe it's gonna help you have a sense of, who those people, that person could be. So I have two examples I wanna share with you of people very inspiring. Hassan Minhaj, I love him so much, and Janet Mock. So those people are just rock stars to me. So just a little bit about them if you don't know. So Hassan is probably, arguably, the current Indian American Muslim who has the most agency in the States. So he has a show that's called Patriot Act, and I strongly recommend you check it out. It's on Netflix. It's a Netflix exclusive. And he does a social political comment through lots of pop culture reference about international politics. And so through what he does, it's a 20-minute segment. You learn about, let's say, so many things about Bolsonaro and Brazil, and about the deforestation and how one of the few tribes that hasn't been in contact with other communities is still living there and how there's a threat to their territory. You learn about the Electoral College and the thing about the taxes in the state and how there's a lot of inequities that are being sustained internally by that and supported by the state. It talks about the Me Too movement in China and how they're using memes to be able to contest the state, and they change the meme all the time so that the government doesn't catch up to them. He talks about cricket democracy and cricket diplomacy between different countries, looking at Pakistan and India. And so it's a very broad strokes that, again, compels you to think beyond your own narrative. And the reason why I pointed him out, because originally he did poli-sci, and then he grew into a stand-up comedian act. And then he moved on to The Daily Show, and he was working there, and now he has his own platform. And so when you look at somebody like that, it's extremely transdisciplinary what he does. And his show is like unlike any other. And that's the reason Netflix committed to an exclusive with him. And he said that they made him an offer he couldn't refuse, right? Because his proof of concept was so uniquely him. And so when you think of what we said about transdisciplinary intelligence, he took the totality of all the different parts that make him compositionally unique. Then he was able to architect that in a way that set him up to be so unlike anybody else. The only logical course of action was, okay, we need to hire this guy. And so when you think about that, there's a strategy and there's a logic. He educates people through his own choice of disruption, and he empowers communities. And it's funny how it's called Patriot Act. So the pun is it's an act from the States that's about counterterrorism. And he always jokes on that because he's Muslim and he knows how a lot of negative biases circulate around that. So he used the title as the tool of its own disruption, as a way to anticipate what the nature of its show is about. And so it always has depths and depths and depths and layers. So somebody like that to me is a perfect embodiment of what it means to be transdisciplinary intelligent. Another person I adore is Janet Mock. So she's a, trans person's rights activist, and she is phenomenal. Originally, she studied in fashion, merchandising. I think she has an MA in that. Then she did journalism. She worked as an editor for Marie Claire. After that, she was working at MSNBC as, I want to say an anchors person, but she was like the presenter. She was running her own show. Then she went on to do beautiful things. She has the show Posse, which represent like the trans community and in a beautiful way. And all the cast is from the trans and LGBTQ BIPOC community. She did a documentary called The Trans List. So looking at how a bunch of high profilers in the trans community, particularly in the state, and to give them visibility so that they could self-define their own narrative as empowered people that defy the norm. And so you see, again, from journalism to fashion to politics to showrunner. And I take extremes in terms of the visibility that they have, but intrinsically they have the nugget that each and every single one of us can find empowerment in. It's not about how many likes you get, it's about how rooted you are in an integrity of practice that is there to serve yourself, your intelligence, and then to empower other people educationally through the disruption that you set off. And so those are two people that I take, and I just love them. She has been writing, she wrote 2 memoirs, they're phenomenal. I recommend them. So the last one is, there's Redefining Realness is the first one. So talking about her journey from, age 0 to 20. And the other one is Surpassing Certainty. And it's about from 20 to nowadays. Again, just phenomenal people. And like I said, as we're discussing this, I want you to think about people in your life that you feel have that transdisciplinary vibe, that have that curiosity, that are multi-passionate, that do question binary in a way that's healthy, and they commit to finding an alternative that defies the norm, that reduces the norm, exposes the norm. And there are a lot of ways. I think you are all like that. It's not everybody who taps into their own power, because we think modesty means humiliation, but it doesn't, right? So you can acknowledge your power without getting, self-aggrandizing. And so those are examples of just breathtaking people. And like I said, if at any point you have an idea of somebody that you feel, okay, yeah, now that we talked about it, I think that person applies, then you can just write it in the chat and you can unmute yourself. And we can take a few Q&As right now and get talking for a while. And then we're gonna look at the last part, which is like self-care and community advocacy. So go ahead, guys, don't be shy. Like I said, use the chat. So you can talk. Okay, so I'm gonna let you think it through. So I'm gonna move on to this part, and then we can start doing the breakout room. So we have as much time as we can to talk, so it's not just me. Now, I wanted to make the connection between transdisciplinary intelligence and advocacy and self-care, because it don't seem to be obvious. Now that you have all that knowledge, so what? Or what now? Because I want this to be a practical exercise and not just fancy cogitations that go to nowhere. So once you are a person who is transdisciplinary intelligent, you have access to a lot of information. Information is power and knowledge. So think of all the people who don't have the educational opportunities that you have to gather knowledge, right? And especially transdisciplinary knowledge. So already there's a big equity gap that needs to be bridged. So you become the vessel for opportunities to educate a community through your own transdisciplinary curiosity. The fact that you know stuff about translation and psychology and economics and photography, now you can become somebody who models opportunity for somebody who doesn't have the background that you have. And so doing, that's when we get into the advocacy part, right? And so ways that you can do that, and I'm giving you a few. there's Academia, the platform, but there are others. So I'm not sponsoring anything, but I'm just throwing around stuff to get you thinking. So Academia, you can publish for free a bunch of articles that you're doing. So let's say you have an academic article for your class, and you're talking about the issues we discussed that are dear to you. It's all about the integrity, life, representation, and disruption. Now you have turned in your paper. Your paper doesn't have to die. It can be resurrected into being shared with other people. And this is originally was a free sharing platforms with certain conditions, and it got bought by another business. So I'm not sure about the details, but I'm putting it out because it's about free scholarship. So think about that. You can share what you know and what you stand for in a way that somebody else can then cite you in their own paper, because seeing you give them a sense of, now I can do this as well. And originally it was meant to be free sharing. So I'm listing it off, but know that there are other models that operate along the same lines. So that's the way that as a student, you can impact a community that's way bigger than Concordia. And you're doing this in a way that favors access to knowledge and post-democratizes knowledge. There's so many I want to get into. There's one where you have a clear connection between self-care and advocacy. So now that we're in COVID, how can we be part of communities? We don't want to endanger ourselves or others, right? But we still want to be able to make a difference. There's one, I didn't put it on this list, but it's on the link. When you go for a walk or you go jogging, you can have the app and you can record the miles or the kilometers that you're making. And then you can send them off to an organization who's going to count them as part of their marathon fundraising efforts. Then it can translate your own self-care, getting active, getting some mobility. And then you can use that as a means for them to have access to funding for their own organizations. So think of when we used to go to marathons, right? We're not going to do that for a while. So, but individually, you can break it down so that you do that, you take care of yourself, and as in so doing, you're taking care of a bigger community. And it's not going to cost you anything. So again, here there's a straight correlation between taking care of yourself and empowering a community. So that's one. There's another one where, for example, let me look at them. Yes, one of my favorites, it's audiobooks. So let's say you speak English or so many beautiful languages, right, that we talked about, and you can look through a few book selections that they have. And now you can volunteer to give your voice away for free, where you can sound out the book for somebody who can't read. And so that's a way where you're using your transdisciplinary intelligence because you have different skill set, right? And then you're applying this and you're giving a voice, your voice, you're passing it on to somebody so that your voice gives them access to knowledge that is typically segregated. And so this is one that I'm just in love with, especially as a language obsessed person. But like I said, there's so many that you guys can learn from. So what I'm gonna do is I will click here on the link and I will share that with you in the chat. So in the chat, everyone, I'm putting it in here. We'll take like a few minutes and I want you to scroll through the website and to pick one or two that are your favorites. Oh, we have someone who wants to talk. Go ahead, Irvienne. I think you had a question. So I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing, but I see Irvienne Golson. I see your hand is raised, so you can just start talking. Or maybe, I don't know if it's accidental, but anywho, know that you can. For everyone else, you can take a few minutes, go through the page I just put for you in the chat and go through options that speak to you on a personal level about how you could apply your transdisciplinary agency. Okay, cool. Cool. So before, I give you kind of a sense of, what was on the platform. Like I said, you can also mentor kids from low-income communities online and become like a mentor for them or a coach. So you can become a coach or online coach for free. And this one is targeting high schoolers. So whatever you have and whatever you know is going to come into service to somebody who needs to have help fleshing out a bigger sense of possibility. So with your own transdisciplinary power, then you can be that person for them. It's a low stake investment, but it's also a supremely transformational one. Yes, I see somebody had a question. Oh my, by the way, thank you, Alex. So many people you're sharing there. Amazing. Okay, so I see a question here from Corey. And do we have to think about being a smart dualist? Is it even unsafe to disrupt and there is a little response? What does self-care look like in hostile monocultural environments? Oh, wow. I love those questions, Corey. So powerful. Yeah, so about the safety, right? How can you be disruptive and safe at the same time? How can you share what you know in terms of your power and your perspective without putting a target on your back? So for me, like I said, there are many ways you can do that. There are ways that are subtle, overt, or not so much. I feel a good one is your essays, let's say as a student, or a blog, right? Or social media, or having a page like that. And you could even, join like associations or groups or meetups. And then you can be part of a system where the point of the purpose of, for the reason why the community comes together is to be creationally disruptive as a whole. So when you choose and select supportive environments, you make it all the more so, interesting for you to be secure in the space and also to be participative in a way that creates more freedom for people. So that's one. So I would say essays. So looking for indirect ways to commit to an opinion, where when I write an essay, it's a final thing. Even if it gets dismissed by the person, it's not like we're having a dialogue about that dismissal. So when you look at something like that, where there's a safe distance, even physically, right, between you, the paper, and the person who reads it, that's a way for me to assure and maintain my safety at the same time as I am taking care of my voice, being visibilized by myself. So I will look to options like that. And depending on your level of comfort and how long you've been in this, then you can level up in terms of, the challenge that this is going to mean for you. So let's say you have an essay, then the next step would be your oral presentation, right? Because you own the stage for 15 minutes, it's all about you. It's only you. You won't be contested in that manner. And another way, and then it's very smart about that, is to go to events that are designed for that, because the community is already invested in the sense of self-care and advocacy that you're sharing. So here you won't have trolls or other things like that. So you have to be strategic, right? You're not gonna openly barge into a report with someone who's only expressed disrespect or disregard, or like a very bigot kind of a mindset. Because if the person is closed off, then the only report I would have is a blog. You can read my blog and I can just close off all the comments. So depending on who the person is, you choose the nature of the rules of engagement, right? I won't expose my body, myself, in a physical manner to somebody who already overtly manifested that they have, aggression tendencies towards my speech. However, that person, I could refer to a blog, to a video, to an artist, to something, and it's extremely protective and mindful of my own energies. As I'm doing this, people that show response, that show promise, that are triggered by curiosity, those people I can engage in a much more refined rapport where intimacy is core to how we talk to one another, because I know it's safe. So there are ways and ways around that. So I hope, Corey, that answers your question. Excellent. So we went on this website, like I said. So I'm gonna pull up the PowerPoint because now we're gonna get into breakout rooms, so you can see. So we can see that. Yeah. So before we do that, now that you had a look at the website, you could take a few seconds, like I said, just to pull through and to pick your top two favorite ways of being an activist through self-care. So we've seen so many. Running, jogging, and then sending off your jogging information to the organization so that they can raise money for their group. You can be like the voice for an audiobook for people who cannot read for whatever reason and would like to access the books that are presented in written format. You can do so many things. So you can take a few seconds and just pop on by. Okay, cool. Let me see. I'll send you. Okay, so there you go. I'm putting the website back in the chat because I think not everybody had time to see it. So like I said, you can take a few seconds and just share your favorite options. Cool. So as you're doing this, Cool. Now I want us to get into the breakout rooms because I want this to be about you. Talked enough. So what we're going to do, we're going to go into groups of 3 people. Okay. So everybody has a fair chance of talking. It's going to be 10 minutes per group. Okay. And I will go in and out of groups just to see how you guys are faring and if there's any ways I can support and facilitate conversation. So everybody comes from a different background. So I want you to present yourself. Hi, my name is blah, blah, and then show the things, like share with them the things about you that are transdisciplinary that you're passionate about. It could be something you haven't done yet, but that you would like to do. Like I have an interest in XYZ, fill in the blanks, right? And then the next step is once everybody's gone around, I want you to look for a way to create connections between all of your passions and all of your interests. And the more disruptive, the better, because oftentimes people assume that, oh, you're in economics. Okay, I'm an English lit major. I don't think there's a lot of connection going there. And that's wrong in the sense that there's so much more to be dug into, right? And so I want you to challenge yourself to look for new pathways where you can connect with someone who has a disciplinary presentation of self that is not representative of your own. And as you do so, then you can connect the dots and see how there's a communal spirit that can be infused. Cool. So hi, everyone. Welcome back. So if you want whomever, you can just pitch in and let us know how it went in your group. What did you talk about? What came through? And you can share in the chat as well, as always, if you're more comfortable with that. Okay, so what I can do is I went in your groups and I heard some beautiful things. So I'm just going to hash it out for people who are in the other group who don't know what went on. But, and again, feel free to correct me because I wasn't there the whole time. But some people were talking about this beautiful project revolving around translation. So yeah, I see in the chat, Melissa Ann saying how we had a really great chat about the future of work and the importance of transdisciplinarity in that future. Excellent. And I think it was in your group, you talked about a sort of translation-oriented project where you would look to making accessible information in languages that are typically not included in the default settings for many websites and platforms, right? And so looking at opportunities to share that knowledge about, and maybe even looking into the coding and other forms of programming to kind of, break it out and really open the floor to other communities so that they can be self-established and we don't have to go through translating from French or English to get access to ourselves and to our communities. So that was really interesting. And I know that in another group, people were looking through their favorite forms of self-care and that are also double as advocacy, right? So looking at mentorship and mentoring opportunities to support and elevate different kids that are a bit, in high school, typically in that program. And so looking into that, somebody else was sharing about a beautiful opportunity to transcribe, historical knowledge and to do it potentially, I think, remotely, and explaining to us how typically you have to get to another country to access the artifacts and you have to be on site to be able to digest the core piece of not data or knowledge or what have you, and it could get very expensive. And so now to have that opportunity to work in collaborations with great institutions and to do that from where we are today is very appealing and very interesting. And because it's transdisciplinary, right, going to be transcribing stuff from another discipline, most likely, and also looking for ways to make that accessible in other languages. So I feel that language is something that we keep on coming back to as core to the knowledge, the democratization of knowledge dissemination. And so yeah. So I think what we can do for the last round, go for like a 5 minutes and we're gonna scramble the groups. So technically you should be paired up with other people and you get to do this again, but with other folks. So I guess we're just gonna wait out so that the breakout rooms are gonna be ready and you get to have these conversations again. And what I love is people are talking about collaborations potentially, and this would be tremendous. So to look for ways that you guys can stay in touch and keep this conversation alive and flowing into materialize a practice that's about advocacy and do it as a group. And coming together from wherever you are disciplinarily, I think would be just tremendous. So I strongly encourage you to do that. And so we'll see how it goes with the breakout rooms. Excellent. So you're prompted. So click on and go right on ahead. Hello, hi everyone. I'm so happy and I learned so much. I have to say it's been so interesting. And if I can just recap similarly some of the highlights of our talks. And by the way, I encourage you to also connect with other people in the chat. You can private chat people. So seeing as we're coming to the end of this, you can choose to connect and to stay in touch through that. But talking about lots of language, right? So how you can claim language through a gap that's intergenerational and where there is a diaspora that is a dislocation of access to geography. So how do you remain core and embedded in a culture that's your own and not something you're living through parents or other relatives? So that was another one. And somebody shared a beautiful platform, I think it's upliver.info. Maybe you can put that in the chat for other people, and it's a mutual aid. So it's not about charity, right? It's about solidarity, like I was told. So leveler.info. And it's beautiful. When you have extra money, you can share it across, a certain platform, and then it gets reallocated through the IP addresses of the people. So just to let you know, this has been just fantastic. And I hope you were able to have great value in what we did. And hopefully we get to do this again together. So I'm letting you know, if you want to get in touch with me, you want to keep the conversation alive and you have thoughts, you can reach out to me anytime. Like, I'm super open. I love those conversations, obviously. Obsessed with them, I have to say. So that's why we're here today, partly because I cannot help but talk about those things with you. So I'm leaving this up here so you can just have a gander, and if it tickles your fancy, just reach out. And if not, I just want to acknowledge everybody for your time, the investment. It's a Friday morning and you're here and we have holidays, and the team at Force Space is just tremendous for the work that they're doing, the facilitation, coordination. So I don't know, Anna, if you want to jump in for a little wrap up.
I do indeed. Thank you so very much, Chesline. On behalf of all of us here at Force Space, I'd like to thank all of you for participating and being here. Special thank you to Chesline for expertly leading us through this journey of really discovery, questioning, and engagement. Your attendance is so much appreciated. Before you go, as you would have seen, there was a little poll that popped up for you to fill out. It should only take a few seconds. We'd really appreciate your feedback. I'm sure Chesline would as well. We at Force Space produce and host a great variety of workshops, conversations, interdisciplinary discussions, and other activities. So if you're not familiar with what we do, just check us out at CU Fourth Space, or access videos of our video archive of past events such as this one on our website, which is concordia.ca/4. So just concordia.ca/4. In the meantime, again, happy lunchtime, I guess, for everyone. And thank you all for being here. It's been a great pleasure to have you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. That was great. Sorry I didn't get to chat with everyone. Hopefully cross paths.
Thank you.
Thank you.